Hello friends, welcome once again to the YouTube channel. My name is Samson and I work as a data scientist. Today we're going to be talking about how do you get better with your SQL query. I'm going to be sharing 5 tips that has worked for me as a data scientist. SQL is a very important language for you to learn if you're going to be working as a data analyst or a data scientist or a data engineer. So let's get straight into it. The number one point, I made some notes in my iPad, so I'm going to be looking at that once in a while. The number one point that I want to talk about is learn how to work with inbuilt SQL functions. So functions like lag, lead, coalesce, date functions, learn to work with those, extract, if you do that, what that will save you a lot of time of reinventing the wheel. I'm not saying you probably have to know everything often. It's fine if you're working, for example, with Snowflake, you can go to the Snowflake documentation, you see all of these inbuilt functions and you can just run with them. Or if you're writing your SQL queries in BigQuery, for example, you can also check BigQuery's documentation and you would see all of these functions there. But if you use inbuilt functions, more like also using inbuilt functions with Python, they sort of save you the time of reinventing the wheel. So you're basically calling a function in a place where you have to write a lot of SQL queries. So using inbuilt functions save you a lot of time. They'll also make your SQL queries very readable, and then it makes you much better. So you can do a lot more complex things with shorter SQL queries and also in a cleaner way. The second thing I want to talk about is if you're writing, there's a big tendency that if you're writing your SQL queries, they tend to be complex, especially if you're doing very complex aggregations over time. Maybe you're writing SQL queries to get what was the most bought item from a particular store in a region in the last 5 months. That might even be easy depending on how your data structure is, but just if you're writing, you find yourself writing complex SQL queries, try to break them down. That's basically the advice. Break down complex SQL queries. When you break down complex SQL queries, you find that it's like a divide and conquer approach. So you have now smaller bits of SQL queries to write, and then you can easily bring them together. So instead of thinking about it from a bigger scope, you just think about it in a smaller bit, and then you're able to bring them back together. And then when you do that, your SQL query becomes a lot more faster and a lot more intuitive. That's something that has worked for me, and I think if you do that, you can get better with writing your SQL queries. The number 3 thing, a friend actually taught me this, is indentation. So a big part of writing SQL queries is to make them readable to you now, and also readable to your future self. So you need to think about, in the next 3 months, would I be able to read this in case the code breaks down, or I need to add a little bit to this SQL query. So you need indents. When you indent your, so for example, select, then you can from the column names that you want to write, then from is also on the same line. It just makes it very easy on the eyes to see. And you might feel like, oh, I don't have a lot of time to do that now. But I tell you, in the future, the time you're trying to not spend to indent your SQL queries now, you're going to have to actually spend a lot more in the future trying to read through everything, because it's going to be very heavy on the eye. So I would always advise that you indent your SQL queries, SQL or SQL as people call it. Indent your SQL queries, because they are easier to understand, and they are good for your future self. And especially if you're also collaborating in a team, they're also good for others to also read through. Number 4 point I want to share is this works for me every time. Challenge yourself to make your SQL queries shorter. So challenge yourself to make your SQL query shorter, and a lot of things you can do. For example, one trick I like to put at the back of my mind when I'm writing Python function, Python query, Python codes is Python is basically that I don't repeat myself. So when I see that I am doing the same thing like 2-3 times, I write a function. There are also little tricks like that. in SQL, you can write a city, for example, and then you can basically call the city again and again. So one of the things I try to do is to challenge myself to write shorter SQL queries. I find that when the SQL queries are shorter, they are a lot more legible and they are a lot more easy for people to understand, for my teammates to understand, for me to understand in the future. So challenge yourself to make your SQL queries shorter. It's nice that your SQL queries work, wow, nice, but then if they are too long also, then it gets complex. And that also takes me back to the first point that I talked about, to try to learn more inbuilt SQL queries, SQL functions. Learn more about those functions, because instead of writing long SQL queries, calling those one functions, lag, lead, queries, and the likes, can basically save you a lot of time for you to make your queries shorter. The last thing I want to share in this video is to write. There's no better way to get better than is writing SQL queries than to write. When you write, what happens is you get better. I found out in my previous job I didn't have to write a lot of SQL queries, so I basically lost touch of that skill. But in my where I work presently, I have to write a lot. And I think over the last months and year, it's been amazing growth. So challenge yourself, right? Take up practices. There are a lot of websites out there that basically just give you questions to walk through. Just challenge yourself, write. And you find that as you write, you learn more, a lot of things get more retained, you build a skill. And I think it's a very important skill to build if you're trying to grow your career as a data analyst or as a data scientist or as a data engineer. So write. When you write, you practice more and then you get better. Those are the 5 tips I have for you today. Thank you very much for joining this video. Don't forget to subscribe, and then I will see you in the next one. See ya. Bye.